Hello everyone, Gary here again with POL 493, and today we're going to go over Wilson's dichotomy, the concept of federalism. We're then going to talk about Weber's bureaucracy, transformational leadership, and then lastly we'll go over Simon's bounded rationality. So let's get started. Alright, so we'll get started with Wilson's dichotomy. And Woodrow Wilson is the one who's credited with developing the concept of the dichotomy. And I put yin and yang here because a dichotomy, what it is a separation of things. And so here we have the separation of black and white, yin and yang. And so what Woodrow Wilson says is that politics and administration are inherently different. And so administration should be able to operate without the influence of the political stage. And so there's not any concern about their office. They don't have to necessarily yield to the will of the people, though the tasks of administrations are deemed by political leaders, which are heavily influenced by the people. Administrators, the theory is that administrators are going to be the best and brightest and most qualified people for their position, and so they're going to be able to run this organization more like a business. They're going to be able to run it the most effective way possible outside of that political sphere. And the thought is that it's going to aid in political neutrality. Basically that one person in government's not going to have trouble leading another administration or influencing an administration. The administration is going to act no matter who the president is or who's kind of overseeing them or telling them what tasks to undertake. And so that's kind of what he really wanted out of this. But there are also some cons. An administration kind of has to be involved in politics, and the reason for that is that they know they're the most qualified person within their organization to be able to speak to matters, and sometimes that needs to be heard. It's important for those things to get out and move up into the political realm. And so we can't have this perfect dichotomy where they're completely separate all the time. Very often the waters get muddied a little bit, and administration has to be involved in politics a little bit. So really the biggest concern is that Wilson's dichotomy is far too broad, or not too broad, but I guess too specific. There are certain times where it's important that politics plays a role in administration. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is the concept of federalism, and this is one that I really like because it's something that I didn't really know about before I started my degree program here at CBU. So federalism says that if the federal government wants to enforce any laws or push anything out to the states, that's not an expressed power, which is the ability to levy taxes, declare war, regulate commerce. Those are things that are expressed within the Constitution. Or if it's not an implied power, which is a power to create laws necessary to fulfilling the expressed powers, then they need some way to get the states to follow those nationally defined goals and objectives. And the way that they do that is through this concept of federalism. Now what they do is they provide money to the states when they actually follow what the federal government wants them to do. And so so this has worked out really good because it provides the funding that states desperately need, and it also allows the federal government to enact policies across all of the states. Now, there are some circumstances that come to mind. The first one being marijuana and illegal immigration. Since Trump entered office, he's really wanted to send everybody back into their respective countries. But California identifies itself as a sanctuary state, and that's something that he has a big problem with. And so he wanted to pull the state funding through the concept of federalism. He wanted to pull that funding, but it hasn't been able to be accomplished. Now, the answer for that is that, first off, the funding that he was trying to pull was that of healthcare funding. And the money has to be tied to something. So You can't pull federal money or federal aid for healthcare because of immigration. It has to be tied. Like if the federal government wants to push this initiative, then they need to provide funding to all the states to enforce this immigration standard. But if they don't, they can't just pull something else. It has to be from that same pool of money, if that makes sense. So the other thing is that just because Trump signs an executive order doesn't mean that it is law. Congress has the only ability to create laws, and they also have the only ability to appropriate money. So Trump doesn't have the ability to do that. That's Congress's job, and unless they want to go down that road, it's not going to happen in the state of California. So it's a lot more complicated than I think maybe than he anticipated it being to try and get states to do what he wants. But that's a concept of federalism, and we'll be moving on. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is Weber's bureaucracy. And this was developed by Max Weber, a name that I think we're all probably very familiar with at this point in our education. He says that large-scale organizations should operate within a bureaucracy, and it's the most efficient form of an organization, which is contrary to the negative connotation held by the term bureaucracy today. Now, basically, there has to be a very definite hierarchical structure. Everybody has a boss. Everybody knows who they have to go to if they have any problems. And there's also other criteria that are required to be a bureaucracy underneath Weber's terminology. First, there has to be a fixed and stable structure for dividing tasks and responsibilities. And then the authority to give orders needs to be within policy. Also, only qualified people should be employed to accomplish the work that you have. There should also be management based upon written records, and so there should be policies for everything that that we want people to do. Office management should be based upon expert training, and then lastly, a person within a bureaucracy should be full-time staff. This should not be like a secondary activity. This is a vocation, and so if you meet these defined criteria, then you are within an organization that is within Weber's bureaucracy. And an example of that, I think, that fits very clearly is the fire department. There's a policy and procedure for almost anything that you can think of. And so there's never a question as to where the organization stands. You already know what's going to happen if you don't follow those policies. It's all written down somewhere for you to find it. And so it makes for some great efficiencies and a lack of questioning by the workforce. Okay, so now we'll talk about transformational leadership. And there's a lot of different leadership theories. I chose transformational leadership because I think that it's one of the best theories that we have available to us, and it's defined very well within the text. And basically it says that leaders should attempt to connect with the workforce on an emotional level. They should engage the workforce to want to complete work, to really want to work for that leader, to really want to engage within the organization. And to be a transformational leader, the leader has to have some sort of emotional involvement with the people. It really takes a lot of passion. It takes a lot of vision. The charisma and everything that it takes for the transformational leader is very high. They need to really be involved in the workforce, but if successful, a transformational leader can really take an organization to higher levels. And the very last thing we'll talk about is Simon's bounded rationality. This is a decision-making theory, and what Herbert Simon says is that humans only have a limited capacity to being able to make decisions. They cannot optimize the results of every decision that they make because they're limited in time, resources, and information. And I think that that's very true in any organization where a manager has a lot of things coming at them very fast. They just have to make decisions. They don't have time to research all of the other opportunities that are out there for them and all of the alternatives, and so they have to quickly make a decision with relatively little information. There is something in the book that says good enough is the standard by which these people live by, and I think that that's very true in a sense, because I mean, when you don't have the time and other more important decisions have to be made, there are many times where good enough is just going to have to work. So that's all I have on these subjects. Thank you everybody for listening, and good luck on the critical assignments coming up here in the future.